Welcome, everybody, to the Orange Wheel podcast, the podcast where we support business leaders in understanding the monetary transition. Joined today by Bastien. Bastien and I met via the European Bitcoin Energy Association. The AGM was held in October in Germany, and Bastien and I had the opportunity to watch Bastien's presentation, learn about his role in the French Bitcoin Policy Institute, and a lot of the interesting work they have ongoing, particularly in the Bitcoin mining space in France. So Bastien, with that, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you for the invitation. Sorry, I'm a bit difficult.
Yeah, me too. It's that time of year, with a little bit of a coughing going on. So maybe, Bastien, it would be great to kind of hear a little bit about your background and particularly the roles you play in the Bitcoin space with INBI, EBIA, and other relevant roles you have today.
Yeah, sure. So yes, I come from the renewable energy sector. This is where I was working before to take a step back, and I've translated the book of Lynn Alden, which is called Broken Money, so translated in French. And then just after that, I've tried to start a business in France related to Bitcoin mining, to go see a renewable company and just, explain like what could be done for them with, in terms of like give value to their excess electricity. And this is where I understood that France was very particular, that there was something that people were not seeing in between, and that Bitcoin mining, there was no point to go talk to renewable energy directly for them because we have like the nuclear. So I've started at that moment. So I've started in France, co-founded Institut National de Bitcoin, INBI, which is the Bitcoin Policy France. So if you know Bitcoin Policy UK or Bitcoin Policy Institute in the US, it's pretty much the same idea. The goal is to explain to policymakers, energy professionals as well, and just the society as a whole, what Bitcoin is, what Bitcoin is doing, what it's going to do, to carry on doing, we think, and why it's important to understand this now rather than later, rather than after everyone else. So yeah, that's it. And more recently, a few months ago, I've joined as well EBA, which is the European Bitcoin Energy Association in Europe, which is focusing on the energy side of things. So a bit like us at INBI, we are making we are at the conclusion that before the monetary transition, and before to explain that in Europe or in France, we need to explain why the energetic revolution, which is Bitcoin, why it's useful, because it solves a problem which is more obvious for everyone in Europe. So we start from that point. Does that make sense?
Yeah, very, very interesting. Very cool, diverse background. I think this intersection between Bitcoin mining and the energy transition and energy problems and policy, it's an interesting kind of overlap. And it's certainly, from my early impressions of involvement with EBA, finding that it is a stronger hook. I can imagine it being a stronger hook into policymakers, understanding how to solve energy problems, or at least contribute towards solving energy problems.
Exactly.
And then kind of thinking about the monetary aspects of Bitcoin thereafter. Really cool. So you talked about France's kind of unique energy situation within Europe. Maybe it's worth explaining to the audience what makes France particularly different when it comes to its energy supply system.
Yes, of course. In its energy mix, France has like a electricity part, which is a bit higher than its neighbors in Europe. It's a bit more than 25%. And the reason being that we have a lot of installed capacity to transform energy into electricity. And in those installed capacity, main part is nuclear, which is what makes France unique, actually not only in Europe, but in the world. It's about 70% of the electricity mix that comes from nuclear. And then you add on top of that a bit more than 10% of hydro. And then over the last 15 years, we've been like installing as well more and more solar and windmill, like everywhere else in Europe. Maybe, of course, like not at the same pace as in Germany, for instance, but still. Like the increase there has been very impressive. And so now we have like an electricity mix which is basically like very, very, very low in carbon. Among the lowest one in carbon in Europe, with Sweden and Norway, because those guys in the Nordics, they have a lot of hydro. But us with nuclear on top, we have, it's about 95% of the electricity mix, which is low carbon, and very low carbon footprint. It's about 22 gram of CO2 per kilowatt hour. And if you look at the average in Europe, it's 10 times that. In Germany, it's even more. It's about 300 gram per kilowatt hour of CO2. Wow. So and because of that situation, we have a lot of excess and we export a lot all over Europe. 2022 was just of a bit of a different situation because we had like some issue with the nuclear. So that year was the only year where we had to import. But otherwise, like we are like net exporter. It's still going on. So that's why it makes it quite unique.
Really cool. Yeah, and it's interesting to see how, at least at the EU level, and I think also globally, the mind shift towards, or the attitudes towards nuclear, I think is changing quite a bit. I think there's still obviously a strong contingent of people that are, very anti-nuclear, but overall, I think there's much more openness from legislators that we need to have a diverse set of electricity and or energy sources to electrify our systems, and nuclear is of course extremely low carbon. So if global warming is an issue, energy supply security is an issue, I think nuclear is a very positive option. And I suppose also the technology is continuously improving to manage the negative side effects of the waste that's generated, right? So I think it's going to be a larger mix of what's your view on like nuclear's role in the global energy supply mix over the coming decades? How do you see that kind of playing out?
I think, it's getting more and more important. We see like more and more countries like shifting, as you said, like their idea on nuclear and now having like project to install more of them. The only thing with nuclear is that you don't decide to install a nuclear power plant today and you have it running tomorrow. So with that in mind, if we want to actually electrify everything, we need to bear in mind this as well. So maybe the perfect mix is actually a mix of different solutions, because some have like strong point and less strong point. So if you look at solar and wind, it's very quick to install. It has other issues, but if you want to have like power tomorrow, the thing being that at the moment in France we see less and less consumption. So the problem is not really about installing more and more capacity production if you don't have the demand, And so it's more about maybe using what we have now to the best of its capacity to be able to make the most of it. And if you are able to make the most of it, then you're able to reduce electricity prices, because it's an industry which is very like capex intensive. So there's a lot of capital when you start, of course, to install, and nuclear is huge in that sense. So if you already have something just use it to its best of its capability, because if you do that, you will be able to reduce the fixed cost, which is spread among all the users. So the more users and the more you're able to reduce the fixed cost per user. So this is really, I think, the main issue at the moment, at least in Europe, where like consumption is not rising at the moment. Well, it's a bit of a vicious circle, because if electricity prices are going up, you won't see consumption going up. So at the moment, what we need to do is to maximize the utilization of what we have. Therefore, we are able to reduce electricity prices. Therefore, we see consumption rising. And then after we can have the discussion of like, okay, what we need to install. But if this is not there is no point to talk about like, discussion about, we should install like that many nuclear power plant. With what money? Money is coming from where? It's
a little bit counterintuitive to people who might not think about the capex already being deployed when they hear, okay, we need to increase demand, consumption to bring prices down. It's usually the opposite when people think about just basic economics. Demand goes up, price goes up, right? But in this case, if we're talking about spreading out already deployed fixed costs, then it is indeed the case where we need to, as you said, optimize the demand for the supply that's already been invested in. So in that case, if we kind of look at that in the French context, you had done some analysis that you presented at EBIA on the nuclear fleet in France, and this kind of relationship between modulation and price. So maybe it's worth explaining what that relationship was and what it tells us about the French nuclear reactor fleet?
Yes, of course. The nuclear fleet, nuclear is great because it has this ability to, you can run it as base load, but you're also able to, and especially in France, because it's been deployed that way, in the 70s, 80s, with already in mind that we are installing a lot of nuclear reactors, which is going to be a big share of the electricity mix. We need to be able to ramp down, ramp up a little bit when it's needed because there is not enough consumption, there. So I've been talking to a lot of engineers that were working in the 80s, and already at the time, like the nuclear fleet on the weekend, some reactors will just ramp down and then ramp up on the Monday again when all the factories were up and running. The thing is, we've seen starting from 2000 and more particularly from 2010, for this decade, we've installed more and more. So as I was saying, like solar and windmill, and the consumption hasn't been rising much. So what we've been seeing is the modulation of the reactor has been slightly increasing. So what is the modulation? What we call specifically the modulation is the difference between the capacity factor of the nuclear plant and the availability factor. So, all right, the reactor are available, all this time. So we look at the percentage of the number of hours in the year, but actually they are producing, just that much. And the gap here is what we call modulation. So in France, the gap between the capacity factor and availability factor, like 15 years ago, that gap was about 25 terawatt hour. And today it's about 35. So it's been, slightly increasing. The thing we need to actually look at is that the capacity factor and the availability factor both have been declining a lot. So what we call modulation, which is the gap between the two, which is like the energy which is there, which is available, not being used, is like, it's important. 35 terawatt hour is quite important, it's 10% roughly of what like the nuclear fleet produced. But actually, what we need to look at is the actual capacity factor. And in France last year, the capacity factor was 67%. Which is super low for like a nuclear reactor. So just as a comparison, in the US, where they have like nuclear as well, and they have like some technology, because the French taking pretty much, we've been copying a lot of the things that were done in the US. So it's like we're talking about the same thing, built pretty much at the same time. In the US, like their capacity factor is 91%, 92%, 93% year on year. That it's in that bracket between 90 and 95. So here we've got like if you look actually at this, well, the nuclear fleet in France, there is no reason why it could not run, at a much higher percentage. And here the gap is massive. Actually, if you look at what the nuclear fleet could be doing. So yeah, it's massively underused.
So that's huge. So that's like a massive amount of potential that's latent, I suppose, like underutilized. So what is structurally causing this underutilization? What's the root cause of it?
The root cause is lack of demand to start with. That's really the main point, because France has never been running its nuclear fleet at 92%. Because to start with, we installed a lot of nuclear, so we didn't have the demand, to start with. So it was historically, it was more like around 85%, and then it went down to 80, and then it went down and it went down, and now we are at 67. The thing is that because it's not something which is talked about at all in the media. It was not talked about like for the last. It's just starting to being talked like in the last 6 months. It's being talked a lot, no? But before it was not the case, especially because we were not looking at the right figure. Most people were not looking at the right figure. They were just looking at this gap between the capacity factor and the availability factor. They were not looking at, the availability factor going down. So obviously there are other reasons for the availability factor going down. There is also a lot of a security reason, like there is more maintenance than before, than in the past. You got more work, to check that everything is correct, because the standards are not the same anymore. So that's another reason as well. Because when you stop now a reactor, it's much longer period than what it used to be, and for a longer period than what it is in the US. But the funny thing is, actually, okay, we've got more standards and we look at it more. But if it was up and running, there will not be the demand anyway. So there is not the incentives to make it shorter. You see what I mean? And then
Yeah.
we just don't talk about it.
Fascinating. And I guess particularly in this context where we see, this AI race happening, particularly between the US and China, and one of the advantages China has is that they built out a much more electricity infrastructure, whereas it seems like in the US, even as they deploy all these AI data centers, it sounds like they don't have the electricity yet to actually power all of them that are being built. So it's interesting to see that Europe and France in particular actually have a lot of unused power infrastructure already deployed. So it should be an advantage in that sort of context as well.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
let's dig into like this headline figure. You'd mentioned, and we haven't heard it yet today, but in your presentation, it was 138 terawatt hours of
Yeah.
unused nuclear energy. So how did you ultimately kind of derive that figure? And maybe to give some context, like what does 138 terawatt hours represent? How big of a number is that?
Yeah,
Tangibly.
yeah, absolutely. It's massive. So in France, 56 reactors we have at the moment. Some are 900 megawatt of power, others are zero point 0.3 gigawatt. But altogether, the 56 reactors that come to 61 gigawatt of power, a little bit more. And if you take this 61 gigawatt and you apply to it, 100% uptime, so 61 gigawatt times 8,760 hours, you come up with a figure which is on top of my, I think it's 538 terawatt hour. And so you've got this figure. This is the maximum potential. Obviously, you cannot, it's impossible to be at that level for many reasons because just to start, at some point, there is no more uranium and you just need to stop the reactor and refill. So obviously, and while you do that, you do some security check and so on. So this is like something you can't reduce. But as we were saying, so the US is running at like 92, 93%. France was running at 67%. So if we apply the 92% to the French nuclear fleet, well, the gap between 67% and 92%, I come up with 138 terawatt hour there. So obviously this is like the top of the bracket because maybe the real potential of the French fleet is maybe more around 85%. For many technical reasons, maybe we don't need to go into all the intricacies, but, because it's never been running at 92%. There is a bit also, it's a bit getting older now anyway, but there is a lot of things we don't know also at that point, up to where it could go. If we simply look at this comparison, it's 138 terawatt hour. So that was for 2024. And what was very interesting when I look at that figure is that 138 terawatt hour. It's when I saw that figure, I was like, I saw that somewhere already. And yeah, like a few days before, I was reading the Cambridge report on Bitcoin mining. And for 2024, they were saying that for their estimate, Bitcoin as a whole consumed in 2024, I'm sure you can guess now, 138 terawatt hour of electricity. So that was just a funny little
Coincidence.
thing, this irony. Yeah, so it's huge, basically. The potential is, so France could theoretically, without installing like any new power plant, just by using what we have now, France could like double like Bitcoin hash rate. And so this is what we are working on with INBI, and this is what France is going to do, hopefully. But is going to start to do, basically. We are on that path now.
Super cool. Super cool. No, it's a massive number, and I think that's great for context to understand that that's basically the size of the entire Bitcoin mining network, right? Like that's tremendous potential there. So let's just kind of see here because you kind of answered some of the questions I've had already. Then, how could this be done in a way that wouldn't, I think one of the barriers we sort of see when it comes to policies are like, okay, maybe if we buy into the benefits this provides to our electricity system, and potentially lower prices for consumers. But then they're like, okay, but this all will still cost us capital to be able to actually deploy the miners and integrate the systems and so forth. So how do you think it can be done in a way that is palatable for politicians that doesn't really seek out too much public funding, especially given some of the political upheaval happening in France recently with the government on public spending?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are not able to, from everyone realized tomorrow that France should do that, and we go to buy enough ASIC to do that. I'm sure there is going to be some little logistical issue there. So obviously, like that's a process. So to start with EDF, so EDF is Électricité de France, is the company which is running all the power plants and so on, which is owned by the state. It's public company. It's starting from there basically. It's starting from just starting from somewhere to start to install like the first container with ASIC, and to start with, just to take the bit between I was talking about like which is directly available between the capacity factor and the availability factor, and just to see that here there is electricity that can be used that wasn't used so far, and then once this is done, we can then like ramp up the capacity factor and the availability factor and so on. So it's obviously it's not going to happen like from in one day. It's like a process, and then there is many different paths possible to get to that process, and it's the hot topic at the moment in France. Yeah, exactly how this will be done. So future will tell us, but it's just being decided right now. Yeah, how this happens.
Okay, so it's not really certain at this stage who will actually invest the capital and who will own the miners, who will own the Bitcoin. Will it be a public entity? Will it be a private-public partnership? Some of these different questions are yet to be resolved.
We've had like an American company which is called Marathon Digital. So they've realized, what was the potential in France. I think they've realized that somewhere at the beginning of the year, because in April they've launched a company in France which is called Mara France, and they've started to do like a lot of lobbying to explain that. Actually, that was great because INBI, Institut National de Bitcoin, we were doing a lot of lobbying, but all of a sudden, Mara is not exactly the same potential behind, let's say, financially speaking. So they've had like a huge, they've been able to, basically they've employed very high ranked French people that used to work in the energy sector. And those people have been opening, all the doors for Mara. So Mara has been talking a bit to everyone. They've been explaining that they were going to do some flexible AI because they didn't want to sell like Bitcoin too much. And then they moved on to make an offer to buy a subsidiary company of EDF. In France. So it's the hot topic because at INBI, and just generally speaking for anyone like understanding what Bitcoin is and what Bitcoin mining is in France, we think that it's great if at last we are using the waste electricity. We also think that we've been paying for, we and Europe actually, because Europe as well was part of it to some extent. We've been paying for all this capacity production. Maybe it makes sense if we are using ourselves, the excess that come from there. So now we're having like discussion. So the whole buying process from Mara is on hold right now. And we're having like various discussion at high level in the government, just to explain that there is actually, for a lot of reasons, this should stay in France. This should be made by there are different possibilities, but there is no reason to let like an American company, which I'm very like, American people, what they've been doing to explain what Bitcoin is. But I think it's better if maybe they don't have all the cards in their hand, and if the cards are a bit spread. So this is the subject at the moment. I hope that was clear, because there's a lot of information there, but yeah.
Yeah, certainly. No, I think it's great to hear that particular episode. I think people outside of France and certainly outside the Bitcoin space are probably not even aware that this is going on, and how potentially important it is for French, the future of France, I suppose. And Europe, yeah, certainly.
And Europe.
Because if it is this much electricity potential in the hands of a foreign actor, even if they are, not a nefarious actor, I think it's still something where there is an important power aspects if Bitcoin does ultimately become, as we believe it to be, a monetary foundation of the future. Then owning Bitcoin mining infrastructure will be, a security issue, certainly as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's key. Yeah, absolutely.
So, I think that actually kind of goes into that. I kind of answered my next question, to be honest. So you've also mentioned that there's a draft law proposed in France to enable integration of Bitcoin mining. Is it worth maybe explaining what this law is and what it hopes to achieve?
Well, there's been more than one. This year there's been three already. So yeah, there's been in the middle of summer there was this proposition for EDF to do like a proof of concept and to start to use basically all that I explained, like the extra capacity which are there to mine Bitcoin. That was the proposal. There's been like another one just a few weeks ago. So that proposal was made, the one I was talking about was made by the Rassemblement National, which is the party on the far right at the parliament. There's been more recently, so another proposal by the party it's still on the right, the one just on the left of the one I was talking about, that was proposing, it was like a whole bill, basically, very bullish on Bitcoin, just saying, so in the parliament, putting that bill that basically saying that we are right now in front of a monetary, what was the word exactly, transition, that we need to understand this, that obviously using excess electricity within the nuclear fleet is very important. There was a lot of other points that were discussed, in terms of taxes, and also there was the proposal of a strategic Bitcoin reserve. That was what made the headline. I'm a bit personally less bullish on the strategic Bitcoin reserve because, for many reasons, I think it's more like a communication tool to put that, in front. Because then, a lot of Bitcoiners are very happy about that. I'm a bit less keen about the pump my bag stuff. I'm more keen on especially when you are a country which are in a huge deficit. It's where the money is coming from. But actually, what we have in excess is the electricity. So let's use that. So I think this is the important bit. So we saw that from that party, and then we saw parliament representative from a central party making a very bullish stance in the parliament, explaining the same thing and explaining all the dangers about the Mara proposal and why this should not go ahead. And now we see a previous economic minister from the left. He's not involved. He's still a political figure. He doesn't have a political mandate right now. He says that he doesn't want one anymore, but who knows? But he is making very bullish statement on Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining and why France should use Bitcoin mining itself and not an American actor just take it. So basically this has spread. It has spread from the far right, and now we are on even people on the left. So this is where we are at the moment. It's more.
So that sounds very promising. It sounds like it's, and I think that's important to make sure this is not Bitcoin shouldn't be a particular partisan issue. It should be something that goes across parties. And it's great to see that. I think it's a similar phenomenon we see in other countries where it does tend to originate on the right. I think there's just more liberalism and more openness to free markets. And I think Bitcoin represents a lot of freedom aspects. But then I think the more you dig down, the more you realize, okay, there's national interests at mind. There's good for the entire population. It's got even kind of some socialist aspects to it. So it's great to see that propagation across different parties.
It's a bit more we have some people a bit more liberal on the left side and some people a bit more authoritarian on the right side. So I will not put it exactly that way, but as you say, the main thing is that Bitcoin is politic, but it doesn't care about party. That's it. Yeah, it's transpartisan. I'm not sure if you have the word in English, transpartisan.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I was saying kind of pan-party, but I think transpartisan is an appropriate word. Okay, so what lessons do you think other EU countries like Germany, those here in the Nordics, Benelux, Iberia, Spain and Portugal, what do you think they could learn from the experience you've had so far?
I think the thing, so coming back to electricity mix, so all electricity mix are unique, because you have different capacity and so you use them differently. And electricity at its core, the main thing is that it's not fungible. This is the main thing, is that when you say, Bitcoin is consuming as much as Poland, or not Poland, Sweden, we are not talking about the same terawatt hour. That's the main thing. 1 terawatt hour there doesn't equal 1 terawatt hour there. This is to understand that fundamental thing. Electricity is not fungible. And then, so just to look at every, particular situation in every country. One thing though in Europe is that we are all connected because we are part of one big grid. And so is the regulation that found the institution that manage all this, but we have like interconnection between all the countries. And so when there is one situation in one country, can spread to another. So maybe it's good if we start to speak about Spain, like what happened, the blackout it was on the 28th of April there. In a grid with there are a lot of factors. In a grid with more and more renewable and with low inertia, you've got like some voltage issue, and also you might have some frequency issue. Here, when we had like a situation like the blackout, it spread in the southwest of France. We had some issue as well. Then it was stopped. But just to say that because we are interconnected, one issue can spread to another country through the interconnection. Spain is very interesting because it might have been like a frequency issue, and Bitcoin mining is great for that. Just to support frequency, so on the grid, you need to have like 50 hertz all the time, consumption equal production, just to explain roughly. And the issue is like if you have like production dropping all of a sudden, you need to have like your consumption dropping as well. Otherwise, you've got that problem, and this might have been the issue in Spain. It's a possibility at least. And Bitcoin mining, if it's deployed at scale, it's something that can, shut off in milliseconds without loss, because there's still one block which is produced on the network. So there is no loss of production, and this is the strength of Bitcoin is really there, and this is why it's unique, because you don't have loss of production. So you can stop consuming electricity somewhere and help your grid at this place, to help with the frequency. So this is one thing. This issue being more and more problematic with frequency, we really need to look at it. And also Bitcoin can help on the voltage side as well. It's not as simple, but there is things that can be done where Bitcoin can really be helpful. So this is also something that need to be looked at, because all the TSO, all the transmission system operator in Europe, they all say that, frequency is a problem and voltage is a big issue. We need to find like flexibility tools, and Bitcoin mining is just the ultimate flexibility tools, because any other flexibility tools is better than Bitcoin mining, because they will pay the electricity more than Bitcoin mining. But Bitcoin mining is better than waste. So it's the ultimate, is the consumer of last resort. It's the consumer of first resort before you've got your other flexibility tools, and then is the consumer of last resort. There, it's really strategical just to include it in the toolbox. It won't solve everything, but it's a great tool to have at least. So I think that's the message. Another message actually as well, when you look at Germany. They have announced a few months ago that they wanted to install between 8 and 10 gigawatts more of gas peaker plant. 8 and 10 gigawatt, it's the equivalent of, between 8 and 10 nuclear reactor. This is massive. And why they want to do that, gas peaker plant? To install those, because gas peaker plant gives you flexibility on the production side, and they need flexibility. The thing is that we've got a tool to give you flexibility on the consumption side. And if you have this, and Texas has shown that, you're able to rely less on gas peaker plant, and rely more on this monetary battery which is there. So, and it's better for the environment, and it's better for your budget. So this is the thing not to look at seriously, just for all policymakers and all energy companies in Europe. We've got a way to spend less money, emit less carbon, and have more flexibility in your grid as a whole. Because renewable energies, they have their problem, their issues, but actually here we've got a solution for them. They are not the problem in itself. The problem is that if you don't have the solution behind to balance, well, we have it there. We don't necessarily need gas peaker plant actually. So there are a lot of message for Europe. This is what we are trying to explain. So at INB and at EBA, and this is really like very strategic, obviously.
No, it's great to hear that. I mean, I think that's, the key issue is the balancing of the supply and demand, and the modulation, or the intermittency we tend to have on the supply side. And one solution is investing more on peaker plants, as you said, or other supply sources, and a much more cost-effective solution, and one that also provides a revenue stream, and is to actually put the flexibility on the demand side. Again, I think it's counterintuitive for many people that aren't as intimately knowledgeable about about the way these, the intricacies of our energy system. But from a naive economic perspective, people say, okay, you increase consumption, again, you increase prices, right? So it's great to I think it's important to communicate this relatively, not complex, but counterintuitive solution, and take it to the right channels. Right?
Exactly. I think that's the main thing, is that Bitcoin mining is not, because it's a flexible consumer, then it's not only a consumer, it's also a provider. It's also a provider of reserve, of balance, because it's a flexible consumer. And that's the main thing to make people understand, is that it doesn't only consume, it consumes flexibly, with flexibility, and it's very sensitive to price, that's the other thing. And because of those reasons, it provides capacity, it provides a reserve of balance, and this is what we need. So it's not easy because it's counterintuitive. But electricity is not easy to understand. So I think that's why we need to explain to electricity specialists, like those people who are the one understanding first, actually.
So I think this might have already been the answer to my last question, but I'll just let you verify that. My last question is if you could implant one idea into the energy ministers across the EU's head about Bitcoin mining, what would it be?
Any other consumption is better than Bitcoin mining. And Bitcoin mining is better than waste. We've got a lot of waste.
Okay, so before we wrap up, where can folks go if they want to learn more about the work you do at INB, at ABIA, to get in touch with you directly? What's the best way to find you?
So I'm very active on LinkedIn. So with my personal account, you can reach me on LinkedIn. So it's my first name, last name, Bastien Destuck, or on the INB profile. So INB, we will talk a lot about energy. And with my personal profile, I make more posts about like monetary issue, things like that. We haven't talked here, but this is more personal. On Twitter as well. So Twitter, you can follow the Institut National de Bitcoin account, which is at Bitcoin Policy FR. We've got a website as well, which is INBI, so inbi.fr. And for Bitcoin Energy Association, there is a website which is ebea.org, and active on LinkedIn as well under European Bitcoin Energy Association. So
very cool. Yeah. I'll make sure to put all those connections into the description of the video when we post it. One last question, though, I wanted to ask. Now that you bring up your LinkedIn profile, I have to ask, why is it that you have a donut emoji as your name?
It's because so there is an English. I think she is English. There's an English economist called Kate Raworth, who came up with like the donut theory. Donut theory. It's a theory that talk a lot to people which are like environmentally minded. It's this idea that human activity should stay within like a donut kind of. So the top boundary, those are the planetary limits. So there are some limits that we should not cross. It's not only about climate. You've got nine limits and so on. And the lower bound is like the social one. And so it's a way to try to talk a bit more to like those people on the ecological side, because on the right side, like, it's fine, we've done the work, but it's something that should talk to them, because so this is more like the monetary side of things, but because Bitcoin being like eventually like a deflationary system, so it's a system where you're incentivized to not consume or consume less or consume, in a more like you think before to spend. This is exactly what they are defending, those people, or Kate Raworth, but they just don't see Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is like to me, Bitcoin is the tool which is missing in their theory. So that's why I put that here. Thank you for
very cool. It wasn't the answer I was expecting, so that's really interesting to hear that. Wasteful consumption in a sense. Really awesome. I'll have to explore that further in another discussion in the future. Bastien, thank you so much for joining today, and very much look forward to keeping in touch with you and following the developments at INB and ABIA in 2026.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Ted. Have a great day. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.